There exists within the human soul a place where language fails and understanding begins. It is a threshold as ancient as consciousness itself, a boundary between the world of spoken truths and the deeper realm where wisdom moves like underground rivers, nourishing the roots of being without ever breaking the surface. To cross this threshold is to enter the domain of those rare souls who carry what we might call silent emotional wisdom. They are the ones who have learned to listen with more than their ears, to see with more than their eyes, to know with more than their minds. In their presence we sense something profound, a depth that cannot be measured, a knowing that cannot be taught, a peace that cannot be disturbed by the chaos of the world. These individuals move through life like ancient trees in a sacred grove. Their roots extend deep into the fertile darkness of the unconscious, drawing sustenance from wellsprings that most of us never discover. Their branches reach toward a light that exists beyond the ordinary spectrum of human perception. They stand as living bridges between the visible and invisible worlds, their very existence a testament to possibilities we have forgotten but never stopped longing for. But how do we recognize such beings? What marks distinguish those who have drunk from the sacred pool of silent understanding? They carry themselves differently, not with the weight of accumulated knowledge, but with the lightness of released burdens. Their eyes hold a quality of witnessing that sees beyond the masks and performances of everyday life. When they speak, their words arrive like drops of morning dew, few in number but carrying within them the concentrated essence of vast experiences. More often, however, they do not speak at all. They have discovered what the mystics have always known, that the most profound truths resist capture in the nets of language. Words, no matter how carefully chosen, can only point toward the moon of understanding. They can never be the moon itself. And so these carriers of silent wisdom have learned to communicate in the older languages of presence, of being, of simply existing in a way that creates space for others to discover their own depths. This is not the silence of emptiness or withdrawal. This is the pregnant silence that exists in the pause between musical notes, a silence so full of potential that it gives birth to melody. It is the silence of the chrysalis, where transformation occurs in darkness and quiet, away from the scrutinizing eyes of the world. It is the silence of the deep ocean, vast and mysterious, holding within its depths treasures that surface dwellers can only imagine. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious as a great sea that connects all human souls, filled with archetypal energies and primordial wisdoms that flow beneath the surface of individual consciousness. Those who carry silent emotional wisdom have learned to navigate these deeper currents. They have developed what we might call a different kind of sight, an inner vision that perceives the eternal patterns playing out through temporal forms. When we encounter such individuals, we often feel something stir within ourselves that we cannot name. It is as if their silence awakens an echo in our own depths, calling forth memories of a homeland we never knew we had lost. In their presence, the chattering mind grows quiet, and for a moment, we glimpse the possibility of a different way of being, one rooted in wisdom rather than knowledge, in understanding rather than information, in being rather than becoming. They have learned what it means to descend into the luminous darkness that Jung called the shadow realm, not the darkness of evil or pathology, but the fertile darkness where seeds of transformation germinate. They have walked through their own underworld and emerged not unscathed, but rather scarred in ways that have become sources of light. Their wounds have been transformed through a kind of alchemy that turns lead into gold, suffering into compassion, confusion into clarity. This descent into darkness is perhaps the most crucial journey any human soul can undertake. It requires tremendous courage to face the parts of ourselves we have rejected, denied, or simply never acknowledged. But those who carry silent emotional wisdom have made this journey not once, but repeatedly. They understand that individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming whole, is not a destination but a way of traveling through life. In their silence, they hold space for possibilities that words might destroy. They create containers strong enough to hold the volatile emotions of others without being overwhelmed or reactive. Like master craftsmen who have learned their art through years of patient practice, they know when to speak and when to remain quiet, when to offer advice and when to simply be present, when to illuminate and when to allow others to find their own light in the darkness. As we begin this exploration of the 11 traits that mark those who carry silent emotional wisdom, we must prepare ourselves for a different kind of journey. This is not a path of linear learning or intellectual accumulation. This is a spiral descent into the mystery of human consciousness itself, where each trait we discover will reveal layers of meaning that extend far beyond simple behavioral observations. We are about to enter a sacred grove where the trees speak in rustling leaves and creaking branches, where the wisdom is written not in books, but in the very substance of being itself. Here, in the threshold between the known and unknown, we begin our pilgrimage into the depths of silent emotional wisdom. There exists a sacred paradox in the human soul, that our deepest wounds become our greatest teachers, that our most profound suffering transforms into our most luminous wisdom. In the mysterious alchemy of consciousness, those who have descended into their own underworld return bearing something precious, the ability to transmute lead into gold, not in the material realm, but in the infinitely more complex domain of the human heart. The ancient alchemists spoke of the nigredo, the blackening phase where all substance must first be broken down, dissolved, purified through fire and dissolution. They understood what modern consciousness often forgets, that creation requires destruction, that rebirth demands a kind of death, that the phoenix must burn completely before it can rise from its own ashes. In the laboratory of the soul, suffering serves as both the fire and the crucible, both the destroyer and the revealer of what lies hidden beneath the surface of our constructed selves. Watch closely those who carry this first mark of deep knowing. Their eyes hold a particular quality of light, not the brightness of innocence, but the deeper luminescence of understanding earned through passage. They have walked through valleys where others fear to tread, not by choice, but by the mysterious curriculum of existence itself. Their scars are not badges of victimhood, but sacred texts written in the universal language of transformation. These wounded healers, for that is what they become, understand something fundamental about the nature of human suffering that cannot be learned from books or teachings alone. They know that pain is not the enemy of growth, but its most dedicated teacher. They have discovered that the very experiences that seem to destroy them were actually reshaping them, forging them in fires hot enough to burn away everything false, everything superficial, everything that was merely persona and not authentic self. In the darkness of their personal nigredo, they encountered what Jung called the shadow, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing aspect of their own being that demanded integration. They learned that wholeness is not achieved by eliminating darkness, but by developing a conscious relationship with it. Their suffering taught them to embrace paradox, to hold tension without resolution, to find meaning in meaninglessness itself. The alchemy of their transformation is visible to those who know how to see. Where others might perceive only brokenness, these individuals radiate a strange kind of wholeness, not the wholeness of perfection, but the deeper wholeness of integration. They have learned to inhabit their contradictions with grace, to carry their wounds not as burdens, but as sources of profound empathy and understanding. Their presence speaks before their words ever form. There is something in their silence that communicates volumes, a quality of being that suggests they have been somewhere others have not, that they have seen something others have not seen, that they have survived something others have not survived. This is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of fullness, pregnant with understanding that cannot be easily articulated, but can be deeply felt. They possess what might be called wounded wisdom, a form of knowing that emerges only through the marriage of suffering and consciousness. They understand that healing is not the absence of pain, but the transformation of pain into wisdom, not the elimination of scars, but the recognition that scars are evidence of the soul's remarkable capacity for regeneration and renewal. In their journey through the darkness, they discovered something paradoxical about strength. They learned that true power is not the ability to avoid being broken, but the capacity to be broken and still continue, to be shattered and still love, to be wounded and still serve. Their strength is not the brittle strength of armor, but the flexible strength of the willow that bends without breaking, that yields to the storm but does not surrender its essential nature. These bearers of alchemical wisdom understand the economy of the soul in ways that those who have lived only on the surface cannot comprehend. They know that nothing is wasted in the psyche's mysterious accounting system, that every pain serves a purpose, that every loss carries within it the seed of some essential gain. They have learned to trust the process even when they cannot understand it, to surrender to the transformative fire even when it seems to promise only destruction. Their compassion carries a particular quality, not the theoretical compassion of those who have read about suffering, but the embodied compassion of those who have lived it, breathed it, been dissolved by it, and somehow emerged more human rather than less. They can sit with others in their darkness without trying to fix or change or illuminate, because they know that darkness has its own wisdom, its own necessary season in the cycle of becoming. They speak the language of symbols and metaphors naturally, not as literary devices, but as the authentic tongue of the transformed soul. Their suffering has opened them to the archetypal dimension of experience, where personal pain connects to universal themes, where individual wounds become windows into the collective human condition. They understand that their story is not only their own, but part of the larger story that humanity has been telling itself since consciousness first emerged from the darkness of pure instinct. In their presence, others often feel permission to acknowledge their own wounds, their own struggles, their own imperfections. These wounded healers create sacred space simply by being who they are, living proof that it is possible to be broken and beautiful simultaneously, that it is possible to carry pain and still radiate light, that it is possible to be scarred and still be whole. They have learned what the mystics have always known, that the crack in everything is how the light gets in. Their wounds have become portals, their scars have become doorways, their suffering has become a kind of strange and terrible gift that they can offer to a world that desperately needs to understand that brokenness is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a deeper chapter. The gold they carry is not the fool's gold of naive optimism, but the authentic gold of hard-won wisdom. It gleams not with the bright superficiality of untested belief, but with the deep luster of truth discovered in the furnace of experience. They know that this gold cannot be counterfeited, cannot be manufactured, cannot be purchased or borrowed or stolen. It can only be earned through the ancient process of descent, dissolution, and conscious return. Their very existence becomes a teaching, a living demonstration that the human spirit is more resilient than we dare imagine, more creative than we dare hope, more capable of transformation than we dare believe. They walk among us as quiet revolutionaries, overturning our assumptions about strength and weakness, about success and failure, about what it means to live a meaningful life. They have discovered that the wound is the place where the light enters, that the break is where the breakthrough occurs, that the dying is where the being born begins. In accepting their own imperfection, they have touched something perfect. In embracing their own limitation, they have discovered something limitless. In surrendering to their own mortality, they have tasted something eternal. This is the sacred alchemy that marks them. They have learned to love their fate, not despite its difficulties, but because of the way those difficulties have shaped them into vessels capable of holding both darkness and light, both sorrow and joy, both the human and the divine. They carry their transformed wounds like sacred relics, not as evidence of what broke them, but as proof of what remade them, proof that the soul's capacity for renewal is as boundless as its capacity for love. In the vast amphitheater of human existence, where countless souls perform their daily dramas beneath the watchful gaze of eternity, there exists a particular quality of consciousness that transcends the ordinary ways of seeing. It is the gift of the observer, not the casual glance that skims across surfaces, but the penetrating vision that pierces through the veils of appearance to touch the essence that dwells beneath. This is the second emanation of their being, this capacity to witness with a clarity that unsettles and illuminates in equal measure. They sit, metaphorically speaking, in the highest balcony of awareness, positioned not above others in judgment, but at a vantage point where the full spectrum of human theater becomes visible. From this place of elevated perception, they see what Jung understood so profoundly, that every human interaction is a complex dance between what we show and what we hide, between the mask we present to the world and the authentic self that yearns to be known. The persona, that carefully crafted facade we all learn to wear from our earliest days, becomes transparent to their gaze. They see through the elaborate costumes of social acceptability, through the rehearsed lines of conventional interaction, through the practiced gestures that maintain our collective illusion of having everything under control. But their seeing is not the harsh exposure of a surgeon's lamp. It is the gentle revelation of dawn, gradually illuminating what was always there, waiting to be acknowledged. Like Jung's wise old man archetype, they embody a quality of perception that comes not from intellectual analysis, but from a deep, intuitive understanding of the human condition. They recognize the universal patterns that play out across the stage of consciousness, the eternal dramas of love and loss, power and surrender, the search for meaning in a world that often seems to offer only fragments of truth. Their eyes become repositories of ancient wisdom, holding space for the recognition that what appears to be individual struggle is often the collective human story, expressing itself through particular forms. In their presence, others begin to sense that they are being seen in a way that is both foreign and familiar. It is the recognition that comes when someone looks past our carefully maintained exterior and glimpses the authentic being that resides beneath our protective layers. This can be deeply unsettling, for most of us have grown so accustomed to being seen only through the lens of our persona that we have forgotten what it feels like to be witnessed in our totality. They observe the shadow dancing behind every carefully constructed identity, not with the intention to expose or condemn, but with the understanding that the shadow is as much a part of our wholeness as the light we choose to display. They see the rejected aspects of personality that have been banished to the unconscious, the disowned qualities that continue to influence behavior from behind the curtain of awareness. Their perception encompasses both the angel and the demon, recognizing that true individuation requires the integration of all aspects of the self, not merely the cultivation of those qualities deemed socially acceptable. In the eyes of a lover, they witness not only the beloved, but also the projection of the anima, or animus, the contrasexual aspect of the psyche that seeks completion through relationship. They understand that what we call love is often a complex mixture of genuine recognition and psychological projection, that the intensity of romantic attraction frequently signals the presence of unconscious contents seeking expression through the other. Their compassionate observation allows for both the beauty of human connection and the recognition of its underlying psychological dynamics. When they encounter the child hiding within every adult, they do not dismiss this as immaturity, but recognize it as the eternal puer or puella, the aspect of the psyche that remains forever young, curious, and open to possibility. They see how this inner child may have been wounded by life's inevitable disappointments, how it may have retreated into the protective shell of adult sophistication, and how it continues to yearn for the wonder and spontaneity that characterized its original expression. Their silence becomes a sacred space, a temple of witnessing where others can begin to see themselves more clearly. It is not the empty silence of absence, but the pregnant silence of deep listening, of total presence. In this silence, the usual compulsions to perform, to justify, to maintain the elaborate structures of ego identification begin to lose their urgency. People find themselves speaking truths they had not intended to share, revealing aspects of themselves that had been carefully hidden even from their own conscious awareness. This quality of witnessing operates through what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension of opposites without collapsing into one side or the other. They can simultaneously see someone's strength and vulnerability, their wisdom and folly, their capacity for love and their tendency toward selfishness. Rather than judging these contradictions, they hold space for the full complexity of human nature, understanding that integration requires acknowledgement of our multifaceted reality. In the great theater of relationship, they recognize the archetypal patterns that govern human interaction. They see the parent and child dynamics playing out between lovers, the projection of the senex onto authority figures, the search for the great mother in friendships and partnerships. Their perception allows them to witness these patterns without becoming unconsciously entangled in them, to see the universal themes expressing themselves through particular relationships and circumstances. The gift of their observation extends beyond the personal to encompass the collective dimensions of human experience. They recognize how individuals carry the burdens and gifts of their cultural inheritance, how family patterns repeat themselves across generations until someone develops the consciousness to break the chain of unconscious transmission. They see how the wounds of history live within the psyche of individuals, how the collective shadow expresses itself through personal conflicts and social tensions. Their way of seeing operates through a kind of dual consciousness. They remain fully present to the immediate reality of any interaction while simultaneously aware of the deeper currents that flow beneath the surface. This allows them to respond authentically to what is happening in the moment while maintaining awareness of the larger patterns and purposes that may be serving. They become living bridges between the personal and the transpersonal, between the individual and the collective, between the conscious and the unconscious. In their presence, the carefully maintained boundaries between public and private self begin to dissolve, not through invasion or manipulation, but through the natural response of the psyche to being truly seen. When someone encounters a quality of perception that sees through pretense without judgment, that recognizes the universal in the particular, that holds space for both light and shadow, the soul begins to relax its defensive postures. They understand that most human suffering comes from the exhausting effort to maintain an image that does not fully represent our authentic being. The persona, while necessary for social functioning, becomes a prison when we identify with it completely. when we forget that it is merely a tool for interaction rather than the totality of who we are. Their witnessing creates a field of permission for others to step beyond the confines of their self-imposed limitations. The depth of their perception comes not from psychological training or intellectual understanding, though these may be present, but from their willingness to face their own shadow, to acknowledge their own contradictions, to embrace the fullness of their own humanity. Having made peace with their own complexity, they can witness the complexity of others without the need to fix, change, or improve. Their acceptance becomes a mirror in which others can begin to accept themselves. In the alchemy of consciousness, their observation serves as a catalyst for transformation, not through direct intervention but through the quality of attention they bring to each encounter. Like the philosopher's stone that was said to transmute base metals into gold, their perception has the capacity to transform ordinary interactions into opportunities for deeper recognition and understanding. They see beyond the temporary identifications that most people mistake for their true self, beyond the roles we play, the positions we hold, the achievements we accumulate. Their vision penetrates to the eternal aspect of being that remains constant through all changes, the essential self that exists prior to all conditioning and will endure beyond all temporal circumstances. This gift of perception is both blessing and burden. To see so clearly into the human condition, to witness the beautiful tragedy of consciousness, seeking to know itself through the maze of ego and persona, to understand the profound loneliness that accompanies the journey of individuation. This awareness brings both great compassion and great sorrow. They carry within themselves the recognition of how far humanity has to travel on the path toward authentic being, and how precious are those moments when someone genuinely awakens to their deeper nature. Yet in their witnessing lies also the seed of hope. For in being truly seen, even briefly, something in the human soul remembers its original wholeness. The recognition that passes between conscious beings carries within it the reminder that we are not as separate as we imagine, not as lost as we fear, not as broken as we believe. In the meeting of eyes that truly see, the ancient unity of consciousness briefly reveals itself, and the journey toward individuation receives its necessary encouragement to continue. There exists within the human soul a sacred paradox, one that reveals itself only to those who have descended into their own underworld and emerged transformed. It is the mystery of becoming a vessel strong enough to hold the storms of existence without being shattered by them, of learning to remain centered in the eye of chaos while hurricanes of emotion rage in every direction. Listen closely, for this is the third marking of a soul that has undergone the great work of individuation. Where others flee from turbulence, these beings move toward it with the steady grace of ancient trees that have weathered countless seasons. They have discovered something profound within themselves, a capacity that Jung spoke of as the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces in dynamic tension without being torn apart by the contradiction. Picture, if you will, the depths of the ocean, far beneath the surface where waves crash and whitecaps foam in endless agitation. There flows a current of profound stillness. This current is not disturbed by the storms above. It moves according to its own deeper rhythm, carrying within its depths the wisdom of millennia. This is the nature of the transformed soul. They have found their own deep current, their own center of gravity that remains unmoved by the temporary tempests of human experience. But how does one become such a vessel? The answer lies not in avoiding the storms, but in learning to dance with them. These souls have walked through their own fires of purification. They have sat with their shadow in the darkest hours, have felt the full weight of their own rage, their own terror, their own despair, They have been broken open by life in ways that would destroy lesser vessels. And in that breaking, they discovered something extraordinary, that the human psyche, when properly tended, can expand to hold infinitely more than we ever imagined possible. Jung understood this alchemical process well. He called it the opus contra naturam, the work against nature, because it requires us to do something that seems to defy our natural instincts. Instead of running from difficulty, we learn to lean into it. Instead of rejecting the painful emotions of others, we create space for them within our own being. We become, in essence, sacred containers for the transformation of human suffering. This is not the same as codependency or emotional enmeshment. No, this is something far more refined, far more conscious. These beings have learned the difference between sympathy and empathy, between being swept away by another's emotional storm and choosing to hold space for it. They have developed what we might call emotional sovereignty, the ability to remain in their own center while allowing others to experience their full range of feeling without judgment or the need to fix or change what is arising. Watch them in moments of crisis, and you will see something remarkable. While others react with panic or avoidance, they respond from a place of deep stillness. Their breathing remains steady. Their voice carries a quality of groundedness that seems to emanate from some inexhaustible source within. They do not offer empty platitudes or rush to solutions. Instead, they offer something far more precious, their presence, their willingness to bear witness to whatever is arising without trying to change it. This capacity has been forged in the crucible of their own suffering. They know intimately what it means to feel as though the world is ending, to experience emotions so intense they seem capable of destroying everything in their path. But somewhere in their journey through these inner storms, they discovered a secret that cannot be taught through books or theories. They learned that emotions, no matter how overwhelming, are temporary visitors in the vast mansion of the soul. They learned to observe their own inner weather patterns with the same detached fascination that a meteorologist might watch a hurricane form and dissipate. They saw that anger, like a thunderstorm, has its own natural rhythm. It builds, it peaks, it releases, and then it passes. They witnessed how grief moves through the psyche like a river in flood season, carrying away debris that has been lodged in the heart for years, leaving the landscape cleaner and more fertile than before. Most importantly, they discovered that resistance to these emotional storms only amplifies their destructive power. It is the tree that bends with the wind that survives the hurricane, while the rigid oak is uprooted and destroyed. They learn to become like water, yielding to the shape of whatever container they find themselves in, yet never losing their essential nature. This transformation did not happen overnight. It required what Jung called the confrontation with the shadow, a willingness to face those aspects of themselves they had spent years trying to deny or suppress. They had to learn to love their own darkness before they could hold space for the darkness of others. They had to make peace with their own capacity for rage, for selfishness, for destruction, recognizing these not as moral failures but as archetypal energies that exist within every human soul. In this process of shadow integration, something miraculous occurred. The very qualities they had once feared in themselves became sources of strength. Their own capacity for anger gave them the power to stand firm in the face of injustice. Their intimate familiarity with despair allowed them to sit with others in their darkest moments without being overwhelmed. Their knowledge of their own selfishness taught them when to set boundaries and when to give freely. They discovered that the psyche operates according to the principle of enantiodromia, the tendency of things to transform into their opposite when pushed to extremes. Their greatest wounds became their greatest sources of healing power. Their deepest fears became the very qualities that allowed them to face fear itself with courage. Their most shameful secrets became the foundation for their most profound compassion. Now, when others come to them in crisis, they do not offer advice or solutions from their ego mind. Instead, they create what we might call a temenos, a sacred container in which transformation can occur naturally. They understand that healing happens not through the imposition of external remedies, but through the natural tendency of the psyche to move toward wholeness when given the proper conditions. Their very presence becomes a form of medicine, like a tuning fork that causes other instruments to resonate at the same frequency. Their own inner stability helps to calibrate the emotional chaos of those around them. They do not absorb the emotions of others. They have learned to distinguish between what belongs to them and what belongs to others. Instead, they offer something far more valuable, a living example of what it looks like to remain centered in the midst of storm. This is the gift of the transformed soul, not to eliminate suffering, but to demonstrate that suffering can be held without being consumed by it. They show us that it is possible to feel deeply without losing ourselves in the feeling, to care profoundly without being destroyed by our caring. They become living proof that the human spirit is far more resilient and expansive than we ever dared to imagine. In their presence, others begin to remember their own capacity for stability. They see reflected in these beings their own potential for transformation. The anxiety that seemed so overwhelming begins to settle. The rage that felt so destructive begins to reveal its hidden message. The despair that appeared so hopeless begins to show its connection to new life stirring beneath the surface. This is the work of the individuated soul, not to fix or save or rescue, but to hold space for the natural process of transformation that is always seeking to occur within the human psyche. They have learned to trust in what Jung called the self, that archetypal pattern of wholeness that guides us toward our own unique form of completion. They know that every soul contains within it the seeds of its own healing, and their role is simply to provide the proper conditions for that healing to unfold. They have become gardeners of the human spirit, tending the soil of consciousness with the same patience and reverence that a master gardener tends their sacred grove. They know that growth cannot be forced, only invited. They understand that healing happens in its own time and in its own way, and their job is not to control the process, but to create the container in which it can occur safely. In a world that increasingly demands quick fixes and immediate solutions, they offer something revolutionary: the gift of presence, the power of witnessing, the medicine of unconditional acceptance. They remind us that sometimes the most profound healing happens not through doing, but through being, not through changing what is, but through accepting what is so completely that transformation becomes inevitable. This is the mark of a soul that has been tempered by fire and flood, that has learned to become a vessel strong enough to hold the full spectrum of human experience without being overwhelmed by it. They are the harbingers of a new way of being in the world, one that honors both strength and vulnerability, one that recognizes that our greatest power often lies not in our ability to control life, but in our capacity to dance with it in all its wild and unpredictable beauty. In the symphony of human communication, most of us have learned to play only the notes, rushing from word to word, filling every gap with sound as if silence were an enemy to be conquered, rather than a friend to be embraced. But those who carry silent emotional wisdom have discovered something extraordinary. They have learned to play the rests between the notes, understanding that music lives not just in sound, but in the spaces where sound ceases to be. This is their fourth trait, perhaps the most mysterious and profound of all, their mastery of what we might call the language of silences. They move through conversations like skilled dancers who know that the pause between steps creates the rhythm, that the held breath before the leap generates the power for flight. In their presence, words become precious, rare things, like gems that have been polished by patience and delivered only when they can catch and reflect the light of truth. Watch them in conversation and you will notice something remarkable. Where others rush to fill the uncomfortable gaps with nervous chatter or hasty responses, these wisdom carriers allow silence to expand and breathe. They understand what the ancient mystics knew, that silence is not the absence of communication, but rather its most refined form. It is the womb of understanding, the sacred space where meaning gestates before it is ready to be born into the world of words. Jung spoke of the transcendent function, that mysterious process by which the conscious and unconscious minds communicate with each other, often through symbols, dreams, and intuitive insights that arise in moments of quiet receptivity. Those who have mastered the language of silences have become fluent in this deeper communication. They know how to create the inner stillness necessary for wisdom to emerge from the depths of the psyche. In their silence, they offer something increasingly rare in our noise-saturated world, the gift of genuine listening, not the superficial listening that waits for its turn to speak, but the profound listening that creates space for the unspoken truths to surface. They become living vessels of receptivity, their silence an invitation for others to dive beneath the surface chatter of their own minds and discover what they really want to say. This is not passive silence. It is dynamic, alive, pregnant with possibility. Like the silence that exists in the center of a storm, it is a place of power and potential. In this silence, they hold the paradox that Jung called the union of opposites. They are simultaneously empty and full, receptive and generative, listening and speaking without words. When they do choose to break their silence, their words carry a different quality entirely. They arrive not as products of mental calculation or social conditioning, but as expressions of something deeper, intuitive knowings that have been allowed to ripen in the fertile soil of quiet contemplation. Each word has been weighed in the scales of necessity, tested against the truth of their inner experience, refined until it carries only what is essential. Their speech becomes like morning dew, crystalline, pure, appearing as if by magic in the space between night and day. These words do not seek to impress or convince. They simply offer themselves as gifts, drops of distilled experience that can nourish the soul of anyone ready to receive them. They understand that true communication happens not when we speak the most words, but when we speak the right words at the right moment in the right way. This mastery extends beyond verbal communication into the realm of what psychologists call meta-communication, the messages we send through presence, gesture, energy, and being. Their silence speaks volumes about acceptance, understanding, and unconditional positive regard. Others feel safe in their presence because they sense someone who will not judge, interrupt, or try to fix them, but will simply hold space for whatever wants to emerge. They have learned what lovers know in their most intimate moments, that the deepest communion often happens in silence, in the spaces between words where souls touch without the mediation of language. They have discovered that profound truths are like shy animals. They will only emerge when the environment is quiet enough, safe enough, still enough for them to risk showing themselves. This understanding extends to their relationship with the great mysteries of existence. They do not demand that life explain itself to them in words they can easily understand. Instead, they have learned to appreciate mystery as mystery, to let some questions remain unanswered, to find peace in not knowing while remaining open to whatever wisdom might arise from the depths of unknowing. Jung often spoke of the numinous, those experiences of the sacred that touch us beyond the reach of rational understanding. Those who have mastered the language of silences have learned to recognize and honor these numinous moments. They know that such experiences cannot be captured in words, but can only be pointed toward, like trying to describe the fragrance of a rose to someone who has never smelled one. In their silence, they become like clear pools of water that reflect the moon without claiming to be the moon itself. They understand that their role is not to be the source of wisdom, but to create the conditions where wisdom can be recognized and received. Their silence becomes a mirror in which others can see their own depths, a backdrop against which the quiet voice of their own inner knowing can finally be heard. This trait also reveals their understanding of what the ancients called divine timing. They have learned to trust the natural rhythms of revelation, knowing that forcing wisdom to emerge before its time only distorts and diminishes it. Like farmers who know that seeds germinate in darkness and silence before they break through the soil into light, they are content to wait, to tend, to trust the process of organic unfolding. Their mastery of silence also extends to their relationship with their own inner dialogue. While most of us are constantly accompanied by the chattering commentary of our ego mind, these wisdom carriers have learned to create spaces of inner stillness, where they can hear the deeper currents of their own being. They have developed what we might call an inner sanctuary, a place of quiet within themselves that remains untouched by the chaos of external circumstances. In this inner sanctuary, they commune with what Jung called the self, that deeper, wiser aspect of consciousness that exists beyond the ego's fears and desires. This communion happens not through thinking or analyzing, but through a kind of receptive attention that allows insight to arise naturally from the depths of being. As we witness this trait in action, we begin to understand that these carriers of silent emotional wisdom have discovered something profound about the nature of truth itself. They have learned that the most important truths cannot be grasped by the mind but can only be received by the heart, not through aggressive pursuit, but through patient receptivity, not through the accumulation of words, but through the cultivation of the silence in which words can finally find their proper meaning and power. In the depths of every human soul lives a twin, a dark mirror, a rejected sibling, a disowned aspect of the self that contains everything we have refused to acknowledge as our own. This shadow, as Jung called it, is not evil in any cosmic sense, but rather the repository of all that we have deemed unacceptable, all that we have banished from our conscious identity in our desperate attempt to become who we think we should be rather than who we actually are. Most humans spend their entire lives in flight from this dark companion, constructing elaborate defenses, projecting its contents onto others, maintaining the exhausting fiction that they are purely light, purely good, purely acceptable. But those who carry the fifth mark of deep knowing have undertaken a different journey entirely, the heroic descent into their own underworld, the courageous confrontation with everything they have hidden from themselves. Watch how they move through the world with a particular kind of ease, a relaxed authenticity that speaks of someone who has nothing left to hide, nothing left to prove, nothing left to defend. They have met their shadow not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a lost part of themselves to be reclaimed. In this reunion, they have discovered something revolutionary, that wholeness is not achieved through perfection, but through integration, not through the elimination of darkness, but through its conscious incorporation into the totality of who they are. The journey to befriend the shadow begins with the shattering recognition that the very qualities we most despise in others often live, unacknowledged, within ourselves. This is perhaps the most humbling discovery in all of human psychology, that our strongest reactions, our most vehement judgments, our most passionate condemnations often point directly to aspects of our own nature that we have refused to see. The shadow reveals itself through our projections, speaking to us in the language of what we cannot stand in others. But these wise ones have learned to read this language, to follow the breadcrumbs of their own reactivity back to their own hidden chambers. When they find themselves in the grip of righteous anger, they ask, "Where does this same quality live in me?" When they encounter behavior that triggers their moral outrage, they inquire, "How does this mirror something I carry but refuse to acknowledge?" This is not self-flagellation but self-honesty, the brave practice of reclaiming what they have disowned. The integration of shadow is not a one-time event but an ongoing dance, a continuous conversation between the acceptable and the unacceptable aspects of the self. They have learned to hold both their generosity and their selfishness, their kindness and their cruelty, their wisdom and their foolishness, within the same vessel of consciousness. This is not moral relativism, but psychological realism, the recognition that human beings are gloriously, terrifyingly complex creatures who contain multitudes. In befriending their shadow, they have discovered resources that were previously unavailable to them. The very qualities they once rejected often contained energy that, when consciously integrated, becomes available for creative expression. Their suppressed anger becomes passion for justice. Their denied selfishness becomes healthy self-advocacy. Their rejected sexuality becomes creative life force. Their hidden aggression becomes the warrior energy needed to protect what they love. This integration creates a particular quality of presence that others recognize instinctively, even if they cannot name it. There is something complete about these individuals, something whole that goes beyond the superficial wholeness of those who have simply avoided conflict or difficulty. They radiate the deep wholeness that comes only from having gathered all the scattered pieces of themselves and forged them into conscious unity. Their emotional wisdom springs directly from this marriage of light and shadow, because they have embraced their own capacity for both love and hatred, for both creation and destruction, for both generosity and selfishness. They can hold space for the full spectrum of human experience in others. They are not shocked by human complexity because they have made peace with their own complexity. They are not threatened by darkness because they have learned to dance with their own darkness. This creates a profound shift in how they relate to moral and ethical questions. Instead of approaching life from a position of rigid righteousness, they engage with the messy complexity of human existence with nuance and compassion. They understand that most human behavior emerges from a mixture of motivations, that people are rarely purely good or purely evil, that moral development is a gradual process of integration rather than a sudden achievement of perfection. Their relationships carry a particular depth because they are capable of seeing and accepting the shadow aspects of others without judgment or the need to fix or change. They can love someone while acknowledging their flaws, can maintain connection while recognizing limitations, can offer acceptance without enabling destructive behavior. This creates a rare form of intimacy, the intimacy of being truly seen and accepted in one's entirety. The shadow work has also taught them about the creative potential that lives in what is rejected and despised. They understand that many of the greatest works of art, the most profound insights, the most revolutionary ideas have emerged from the integration of previously rejected aspects of human experience. They have learned to mine their own darkness for gold, to find treasure in what others consider trash, to discover gifts in what was once perceived as curse. This integration manifests as a particular kind of honesty, not the brutal honesty that wounds others in the name of truth, but the loving honesty that acknowledges reality without weaponizing it. They can admit their mistakes without drowning in shame, can acknowledge their limitations without losing their sense of worth, can confess their struggles without betraying their strength. This honesty creates safety for others to be equally honest, equally human, equally imperfect. They have discovered that the shadow contains not only rejected negative qualities, but also rejected positive qualities, what Jung called the golden shadow. Perhaps they rejected their own power because they were taught that power corrupts. Perhaps they disowned their intelligence because they were told it made others uncomfortable. Perhaps they denied their beauty because they were taught that vanity was sinful. In befriending the shadow, they reclaim not only their darkness, but also their hidden light. The process of shadow integration has taught them something profound about the nature of projection. They understand that we live in a world of mirrors, that what we see in others often tells us more about ourselves than about them. This knowledge makes them curious rather than judgmental, investigative rather than reactive. When they encounter behavior that disturbs them, they use it as information about their own inner landscape rather than evidence of the other person's deficiency. This relationship with shadow also creates a unique relationship with temptation and impulse. Instead of viewing their impulses as enemies to be suppressed, they have learned to see them as messengers carrying important information about their needs, desires, and unexpressed aspects of their nature. They can feel their impulses without being controlled by them, can acknowledge their desires without being enslaved by them, can recognize their temptations without being destroyed by them. Their integration of shadow creates what might be called psychological sovereignty, the capacity to own all aspects of their experience without being owned by any single aspect. They are neither inflated by their light nor deflated by their darkness. They can hold both their magnificence and their ordinariness, both their strength and their vulnerability, both their wisdom and their ignorance within the same conscious container. This sovereignty extends to their relationship with their own past. They can acknowledge the harm they have caused without being crushed by guilt, can recognize their failures without being defined by them, can own their mistakes without losing their capacity for growth and change. They understand that integration is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming conscious, not about eliminating their shadow, but about developing a mature relationship with it. In their presence, others often feel permission to acknowledge their own hidden aspects, their own rejected qualities, their own complex humanity. These shadow-integrated individuals create space for authenticity simply by modeling what it looks like to be fully human. Neither angel nor demon, but something far more interesting and far more real. A conscious human being who has learned to embrace the totality of their own existence. They walk among us as living demonstrations that wholeness is possible, that integration is achievable, that it is possible to be both light and dark, both saint and sinner, both perfect and imperfect, and to find in this paradox not confusion but clarity, not conflict but completion, not fragmentation but a deeper, truer, more sustainable form of unity that honors the magnificent complexity of the human soul. Beneath the surface of conscious thought, deeper than the realm where logic constructs its careful arguments and reason builds its systematic bridges, there flows a current that has guided human consciousness since the first stirrings of awareness in our ancestral darkness. This is the realm of intuitive knowing, not the shallow intuition that popular culture has reduced to mere impulse, but the profound faculty that Jung recognized as one of the primary functions of consciousness, the inner compass that points toward truths too subtle for the mind's analytical instruments to detect. Their sixth emanation manifests as this gift flowing through them like an underground river, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom of ages. the distilled essence of countless encounters with the mystery of being human. They have learned, through trial and the gentle schooling of experience, to trust these subtle currents of knowing that arise from depths beyond the reach of ordinary consciousness. Where others demand proof, evidence, logical progression, they have discovered the profound reliability of a different way of knowing, one that operates through feeling, through resonance, through the mysterious attunement that exists between consciousness and the larger patterns of existence. Like the ancient shamans who could read the approach of weather in the behavior of animals, who could sense the presence of water beneath dry earth, who could navigate vast territories by following signs invisible to untrained eyes, they have developed the capacity to interpret the emotional weather of human relationships with an accuracy that often startles those accustomed to more conventional forms of understanding. They sense the subtle shifts in the atmosphere between people before words are spoken, feel the underground tremors of conflict before they surface into conscious expression, recognize the presence of unspoken love, hidden grief, or concealed fear with the same certainty that others might identify familiar faces in a crowd. This knowing does not arrive as thoughts packaged in language, but as felt sense, a quality of recognition that bypasses the mind's need to categorize and analyze. It is the knowing that comes through the body's wisdom, through the heart's intelligence, through the soul's capacity to resonate with the deeper currents of existence. They feel their way into truth rather than thinking their way toward it, allowing themselves to be guided by the subtle pulls and resistances that arise when consciousness encounters the world. Their wisdom has been written not in the libraries of academia, but in the living text of experience itself. Each encounter with another human being adding another page to their understanding of the infinite variations of the human condition. They have learned to read the language of the heart, that primal tongue that speaks through gesture, through the quality of silence, through the space between words, through the thousand subtle signals that pass constantly between conscious beings, but are so often ignored by minds trained to attend only to the explicit and the rational. In the presence of another, they become like sensitive instruments, registering the emotional frequencies that emanate from the unconscious depths of personality. They feel the presence of the unlived life, the weight of dreams deferred, the burden of words never spoken. They sense the places where someone has been wounded and where healing has occurred, where love has entered and where it has been rejected. This sensitivity allows them to respond not merely to what someone presents consciously, but to the totality of their being, including those aspects that remain hidden even from themselves. The gift operates through what Jung understood as the inferior function, that least developed aspect of consciousness that often carries the greatest wisdom precisely because it has not been refined and controlled by ego consciousness. Their intuitive knowing flows from this primitive, undomesticated aspect of awareness that remains close to the instinctual wisdom of the body, to the collective wisdom of the species, to the transpersonal intelligence that governs the deeper patterns of existence. They navigate the complex territories of human relationship not by following predetermined maps drawn by social convention or psychological theory, but by allowing themselves to be guided by the living intelligence that emerges in each unique encounter. They trust the subtle pulls that draw them toward certain people and the equally subtle resistances that warn them away from others. They recognize that these responses carry information that the rational mind, with its tendency to override instinctual wisdom in favor of social appropriateness, often misses entirely. In the labyrinth of human complexity, where every relationship presents its own unique configuration of possibilities and dangers, they move with the confidence of those who have learned to trust their inner guidance system. Like ancient navigators who could find their way across vast oceans by reading the patterns of waves and the behavior of birds, they have developed the capacity to orient themselves in the emotional landscape of human interaction through sensitivity to currents that remain invisible to those who rely exclusively on external markers. Their knowing often manifests as a quality of presence that others find both comforting and unsettling. There is something in their attentiveness that suggests they are hearing not only the words being spoken, but also the words that remain unspoken, feeling not only the emotions being expressed, but also those that have been carefully hidden. This depth of perception creates a field of recognition in which others begin to sense aspects of themselves that they may have forgotten or never fully acknowledged. The accuracy of their emotional weather reading comes not from supernatural gifts, but from the natural human capacity for empathic resonance developed to an extraordinary degree. They have learned to quiet the constant chatter of mental activity enough to register the subtle communications that flow continuously between conscious beings. They feel the emotional states of others not as intrusion but as information, not as burden but as guidance for how to respond authentically to what is actually present rather than what appears to be present. In a world increasingly dominated by digital communication and virtual interaction, they represent a return to the ancient arts of direct emotional communion. They remind us that beneath all our sophisticated technologies of connection lies the fundamental human capacity to feel into each other's experience, to sense the currents of emotion that bind us together in the invisible web of collective consciousness. Their trust in intuitive guidance represents a form of faith, not the blind faith that refuses to acknowledge evidence, but the mature faith that recognizes the limitations of purely rational approaches to the mystery of existence. They have learned through repeated verification that the subtle knowing that arises from the depths of being carries a reliability that equals or exceeds that of logical analysis, particularly in matters involving the human heart and the complex dynamics of relationship. This way of knowing connects them to the wisdom traditions of all cultures, to the oracles and seers, the wise women and medicine men, the mystics and poets who have always understood that the most important truths cannot be grasped by the thinking mind alone. They embody the recognition that consciousness is far more than the narrow beam of rational awareness, that it includes vast territories of knowing that operate through feeling, through symbol, through the mysterious resonance between inner and outer reality. In their presence, others often find themselves reconnecting with their own intuitive capacities, those subtle ways of knowing that modern education and rational culture tend to dismiss or ignore. They serve as living reminders that we all possess this inner compass, this capacity to navigate by feeling rather than thought, to trust the wisdom that arises from the integration of mind, heart, and body, rather than from the isolated intellect alone. In the deepest chambers of human consciousness, where the rational mind fears to tread, there dwells a profound mystery that the transformed soul has learned to embrace. It is the mystery of paradox, that sacred space where opposing truths dance together in eternal embrace, where contradiction becomes not a problem to be solved, but a doorway to be entered. Listen carefully, for this is the seventh marking of a soul that has undergone the great work of individuation. While others flee from ambiguity, desperately seeking the comfort of black and white certainty, these beings have learned to find their home in the twilight realm, where all colors merge and separate simultaneously. They have discovered what Jung knew so deeply, that the most profound truths of existence cannot be captured in the narrow confines of either or thinking, but reveal themselves only in the expansive embrace of both and wisdom. Watch them navigate the complexities of human experience, and you will witness something extraordinary. They do not recoil when life presents them with contradictions that would shatter less flexible minds. Instead, they lean into these tensions with the grace of a master dancer who knows that beauty lies not in the rigid adherence to form, but in the fluid movement between opposing forces. They understand that joy and sorrow are not enemies locked in eternal combat, but lovers whose union creates the full spectrum of human feeling. They have learned to hold grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, recognizing that these seemingly opposite emotions often arise from the same source, a heart that has loved deeply enough to know both the ecstasy of connection and the ache of loss. This capacity was not born from intellectual understanding, but forged in the crucible of lived experience. They have walked through their own dark nights of the soul, where certainty crumbled and the solid ground of their beliefs gave way beneath their feet. In those liminal spaces, those threshold moments between what was and what is yet to become, they discovered something remarkable. They found that the human psyche is vast enough to contain multitudes, spacious enough to hold contradictions without collapse. Jung called this principle enantiodromia, the tendency of things to transform into their opposite when carried to extremes. These souls have not merely studied this concept, they have lived it in their bones. They have experienced how their greatest strengths can become their greatest weaknesses, how their deepest wounds can transform into their most profound gifts, how their moments of greatest despair can birth their most radiant hope. They no longer seek to eliminate the contradictions within themselves, but have learned to orchestrate them like a master conductor leading a symphony. They recognize that their capacity for both cruelty and compassion, for both selfishness and selflessness, for both destruction and creation, are not flaws to be corrected, but essential aspects of their complete humanity. In relationships, they bring this same paradoxical wisdom. They can love someone completely while maintaining their own autonomy. They can offer deep intimacy while preserving sacred solitude. They can be completely present in the moment while holding awareness of life's impermanence. They do not see these as contradictions to be resolved, but as complementary truths that create the full richness of human connection. Their emotional landscape has become like a vast cathedral where all feelings are welcome: anger and peace, excitement and melancholy, certainty and doubt. They have learned that emotions, like seasons, each have their own gift to offer, their own wisdom to impart. They no longer judge themselves for feeling multiple contradictory emotions simultaneously, but recognize this as a sign of their own psychological complexity and depth. This comfort with paradox extends into their understanding of others. They can see the frightened child within the angry adult, the wounded healer beneath the helper's mask, the wise elder hidden within the confused seeker. They hold space for the full spectrum of human contradiction without the compulsion to choose sides or force resolution. They have discovered that the attempt to eliminate paradox from life is like trying to create a song with only one note, technically possible but utterly devoid of the beauty that comes from harmony, tension, and resolution. They understand that consciousness itself exists in the space between opposites, between sleeping and waking, between knowing and mystery, between being and becoming. In their presence, others find permission to embrace their own contradictions. The perfectionist discovers they can also be beautifully flawed. The cynic realizes they harbor deep reservoirs of hope. The eternal optimist acknowledges their capacity for profound sadness. These souls create a field of acceptance so complete that transformation becomes inevitable, not through the elimination of contradiction, but through its loving embrace. They have learned what the mystics have always known, that the divine itself exists in the tension between opposites. Light requires darkness to define itself. Love gains meaning through its relationship with loss. Creation dances eternally with destruction in the cosmic ballet of existence. They see themselves not as separate from this dance, but as conscious participants in it. This is the profound gift they offer to a world obsessed with false certainties and simplistic solutions. They remind us that life's deepest truths are not problems to be solved, but mysteries to be lived. They show us that wholeness does not come from eliminating our contradictions, but from learning to dance with them. In their being, we glimpse the possibility of a new way of existing, one that honors complexity over simplicity, nuance over certainty, both and over either or. They are living examples of what it means to be fully human, not perfect, not consistent, but beautifully, mysteriously, paradoxically whole. They have become what Jung envisioned as the truly individuated soul, one who has learned to contain and integrate all aspects of their being, who has found unity not through elimination of differences, but through the loving embrace of the eternal dance of opposites that is the very essence of life itself. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the noise of the world becomes too much to bear, when the demands of others begin to eclipse the quiet voice of one's own inner knowing. It is in these moments that those who carry silent emotional wisdom reveal their eighth trait, the sacred art of withdrawal, the profound understanding of when to step back from the world's endless hungers and tend the inner flame that illuminates their path. This is not the withdrawal of defeat or the retreat of cowardice. This is something far more mysterious and powerful, a conscious choice to honor the cyclical nature of the soul, to recognize that even the deepest wells must be allowed to refill, that even the brightest flames must occasionally be shielded from the winds that would extinguish them. They have learned what the ancient hermits knew, that solitude is not isolation, but rather the most intimate form of communion, a sacred conversation between the surface self and the depths of being. Jung understood this principle deeply when he spoke of the necessity of what he called active imagination, those periods of deliberate withdrawal from external stimulation that allow the unconscious to surface and speak its deeper truths. These wisdom carriers have internalized this understanding, recognizing that their capacity to offer insight and presence to others depends entirely upon their willingness to regularly return to the source of their own wisdom. Watch how they navigate the competing demands of their existence. While others scatter their energy like seeds thrown to the wind, these individuals move with the precision of gardeners who understand that not every patch of ground is ready for cultivation. They have developed an almost mystical ability to sense when their inner resources are becoming depleted, when the well of their wisdom is running dry, when the flame of their presence is beginning to flicker. This sensing is not intellectual but deeply somatic, a bodily knowing that arises from years of careful attention to their own inner weather patterns. They have learned to read the subtle signs, the slight heaviness in their chest when they have given too much too quickly, the way their words begin to feel hollow when they speak from exhaustion rather than inspiration, the gradual dulling of their natural empathy when they have failed to replenish their emotional reserves. When these signs appear, they do not push through or rely on willpower to carry them forward. Instead, they make what others might see as a radical choice. They retreat, not in shame or guilt, but with the same natural acceptance that a flower shows when it closes its petals at nightfall. They understand that this withdrawal is not selfish but necessary, not weak but wise, not abandonment but preparation for deeper service. Their retreats take many forms. Sometimes it is the literal withdrawal to a quiet space, a room, a garden, a place in nature where they can sit with themselves without the pressure of performance or response. Sometimes it is an emotional withdrawal, a gentle but firm setting of boundaries that protects their inner space from the projections and expectations of others. Sometimes it is a spiritual withdrawal, a turning inward toward the sacred center of their being, where they can reconnect with the source of their wisdom. In these moments of withdrawal, something profound occurs. Like a tree drawing its sap inward during winter, they gather their scattered energies back toward their center. They create what we might call a sacred boundary, not a wall built from fear or judgment, but a membrane of discernment that allows life-giving influences to enter while filtering out what would drain or diminish them. This boundary making is itself an art form, requiring the same sensitivity that a master gardener brings to tending delicate plants. Too porous, and they become overwhelmed by the energies and needs of others. Too rigid, and they cut themselves off from the very connections that nourish their souls. They have learned to create boundaries that breathe, firm enough to provide protection, flexible enough to allow authentic connection. Jung spoke of the importance of what he called psychological ecology, the understanding that the human psyche, like any natural system, requires careful stewardship to remain healthy and productive. These wisdom carriers have become master ecologists of their own inner environment. They understand that their consciousness is a delicate ecosystem that can be disrupted by too much stimulation, depleted by excessive giving, or polluted by exposure to toxic energies. In their withdrawal, they engage in what might be called soul composting, allowing the experiences they have gathered to decompose and transform into the rich soil from which new wisdom can grow. They process not just with their minds, but with their entire being, allowing their bodies to release tension, their emotions to find their natural rhythm, their spirits to reconnect with the vast mystery from which they draw their deepest insights. This process cannot be rushed or forced. Like the slow work of geological transformation, it requires time, patience, and trust in the natural processes of renewal. They have learned to honor these rhythms, understanding that their most profound insights often arise not during periods of intense activity, but in the spacious stillness of retreat. Their withdrawal also serves another crucial function. It prevents what Jung called psychic inflation, the dangerous tendency to identify too completely with the role of wise guide or healer. By regularly returning to the humility of not knowing, by sitting with their own questions and uncertainties, they maintain the beginner's mind that keeps their wisdom fresh and authentic. In solitude, they rediscover their own humanity, away from the projections of others who may see them as sources of wisdom or strength. They can acknowledge their own wounds, their own confusion, their own need for guidance and healing. This acknowledgement, far from diminishing their capacity to serve others, actually deepens it by keeping them connected to the universal human experience of struggle and growth. The hermit archetype that lives within them is not the image of the misanthropic recluse, but rather the wise elder who withdraws to the mountain cave, not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly. From the perspective of solitude, the patterns of human behavior become more visible, the underlying currents of collective anxiety and longing more apparent, the paths toward healing and wholeness more distinct. When they emerge from these periods of retreat, they bring with them something that cannot be manufactured or borrowed, the authentic fragrance of genuine renewal. Their presence carries the freshness of someone who has drunk from deep wells, the clarity of someone who has gazed into still waters, the strength of someone who has tended their own inner fire until it burns bright and steady. Others sense this renewal instinctively. There is something in their energy that speaks of depth regained, of wisdom distilled, of presence restored. They have returned not just refreshed, but transformed, carrying within them new insights that could only have emerged in the silence of solitude. new understanding that could only have been born in the fertile darkness of retreat. This trait reveals their profound understanding of the paradox at the heart of spiritual service, that the more fully we give of ourselves, the more essential it becomes to return regularly to the source of our giving. They have learned that genuine service flows not from self-sacrifice, but from self-renewal, not from depletion, but from abundance, not from emptiness, but from the fullness that can only be cultivated in the sacred sanctuary of solitude. There are those among us who walk between worlds with the natural grace of born diplomats, moving seamlessly across the threshold that separates the conscious from the unconscious, the spoken from the unspoken, the visible territories of everyday life from the invisible realms where the soul conducts its most essential business. These are the bridge walkers, individuals who have achieved something rare and precious in our fragmented age, the capacity to serve as living connectors between the disparate dimensions of human experience. Watch them as they navigate the ordinary interactions of daily life, and you will notice something extraordinary in their quality of presence. They seem to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, maintaining one foot planted firmly in the practical world of deadlines and obligations, while keeping the other rooted in the deeper soil of meaning and mystery. This is not the distracted consciousness of someone caught between two worlds, but the integrated awareness of someone who has learned to inhabit the full spectrum of human existence. In conversation, they possess an almost magical ability to create space for truth-telling. Others find themselves sharing things in their presence that they rarely admit even to themselves, fears that have lived in darkness for years, dreams that have been buried under layers of practicality, longings that have been dismissed as unrealistic or inappropriate. It is as if these bridge walkers carry with them a kind of psychological sanctuary, a portable safe space where the authentic self feels permission to emerge from behind the protective masks of social acceptability. This gift emerges from their own deep work of integration, their patient and courageous journey toward what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole by gathering all the scattered pieces of the psyche into conscious unity. They have learned to honor both their rational mind and their intuitive wisdom, both their need for structure and their hunger for freedom, both their desire for connection and their requirement for solitude. In achieving this internal harmony, they become capable of holding space for the contradictions and complexities that others struggle to reconcile. Their language itself serves as a bridge, effortlessly translating between the vocabulary of the heart and the dialect of the mind. They can speak the language of emotion to those who live primarily in their heads, and they can offer the grounding of rational thought to those who are drowning in feelings. They understand that different people navigate reality through different channels of perception, and they have developed the rare skill of meeting each person in their native tongue of understanding. When they encounter someone trapped in the prison of purely logical thinking, they gently introduce the wisdom of intuition and feeling. When they meet someone lost in the chaos of unprocessed emotion, they offer the stability of clear thinking and practical wisdom. They do this not as teachers imposing their understanding, but as translators helping others discover resources they already possess but have forgotten how to access. This bridging capacity extends to their relationship with time itself. They move comfortably between the linear time of schedules and appointments and the cyclical time of seasons and souls. They understand that some conversations require the patience of geological time, that some insights can only emerge in their own season, that some healing unfolds according to rhythms that cannot be rushed or forced. This temporal fluidity allows them to be present with others in whatever time zone they are inhabiting, whether that be the urgent now of crisis or the eternal now of deep reflection. In their presence, the artificial boundaries that typically separate different aspects of human experience begin to dissolve. The division between work and spirituality, between success and meaning, between individual needs and collective responsibility, these false dichotomies that create so much suffering in modern life, lose their rigid edges and reveal themselves as complementary aspects of a larger wholeness. They have achieved what might be called psychological porosity, the ability to remain permeable to different ways of being without losing their essential center. They can enter the boardroom and speak the language of strategy and efficiency, then step into a moment of quiet communion with a friend who needs to process grief, then transition seamlessly into playful interaction with a child who lives in the eternal present of imagination. Each transition is natural, authentic, embodied, not a performance but an expression of their genuinely integrated nature. This integration manifests as a particular kind of wisdom that emerges from their capacity to hold paradox without needing to resolve it. They understand that life is simultaneously meaningful and absurd, that humans are both powerful creators and vulnerable creatures, that love is both the answer to life's deepest questions and the source of its most profound mysteries. They have learned to inhabit these contradictions with grace, finding in them not confusion but a richer, more nuanced understanding of what it means to be fully human. Their very existence serves as a healing presence in a world that has largely forgotten how to integrate its disparate parts. In their company, others remember that it is possible to be both practical and mystical, both grounded and visionary, both individual and connected. They offer living proof that the splits that seem to characterize modern consciousness, mind from body, spirit from matter, self from other, are not inevitable but are invitations to a deeper integration. As bridge-walkers, they naturally gravitate toward roles that involve connection and translation, not necessarily as formal healers or teachers, but as people who instinctively create opportunities for others to discover their own wholeness. They might be found in any profession, but their true work is always the same, helping others remember who they really are beneath the layers of conditioning and expectation that have obscured their authentic nature. They carry within themselves the living embodiment of Jung's vision of individuation, not as a final achievement, but as an ongoing process of becoming more fully themselves, while simultaneously becoming more deeply connected to the larger web of existence. They have discovered that true individuality is not about separation, but about finding one's unique way of being in relationship with the whole. In a world that often feels fragmented and disconnected, these bridgewalkers serve as reminders of what becomes possible when we stop choosing between different aspects of our nature and instead learn to weave them into a coherent, authentic, integrated way of being. They walk among us as quiet revolutionaries, demonstrating through their very existence that wholeness is not only possible, but is perhaps the most radical act of healing we can offer to a world that desperately needs to remember how to be whole. In the vast subterranean chambers of the human psyche, where emotions settle like sediment through the layers of time, where feelings too overwhelming to process become buried beneath the accumulated debris of daily existence, there moves a particular kind of consciousness, one that approaches the hidden treasures of the heart with the reverence and precision of a master archaeologist. Their ninth emanation reveals itself as this rare gift, the capacity to sense with exquisite sensitivity the emotional artifacts that lie buried beneath the surface of ordinary conversation and social interaction, like those patient scholars who brush away centuries of dust to reveal the delicate features of ancient sculptures. They possess an intuitive understanding of how to approach the buried emotions of others without disturbing the delicate ecology of the psyche. They recognize that each suppressed feeling, each hidden grief, each forgotten joy exists within its own protective layers, defenses built carefully over time to shield the tender places where life has touched the soul too deeply for immediate processing. Their presence in the world operates as a form of sacred invitation, creating a field of safety in which the long-buried aspects of emotional experience can begin to stir, can sense the possibility of finally emerging into the light of consciousness. They understand that the treasures hidden in the emotional underground are not random accumulations, but carefully preserved essences of experience that carry within them the keys to deeper understanding, to authentic healing, to the recovery of lost aspects of the self. In the archaeology of the heart, they have learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicate the presence of buried treasure. A particular quality of silence that follows certain words, a fleeting expression that crosses someone's face. When specific topics arise, the way conversation seems to circle around certain territories without ever quite landing there, these become their guideposts, marking the locations where significant emotional deposits lie waiting beneath the surface. Their approach to these hidden realms requires not the aggressive tools of psychological excavation, but the gentle implements of presence, of patient listening, of creating space without pressure. They understand that forced emotion, coerced feeling, manipulated expression serves only to drive the treasures deeper into hiding. Instead, they offer the gift of unhurried attention, of acceptance that makes no demands, of curiosity that judges not what it discovers. The unspoken griefs they sense are not always dramatic losses, but often the accumulated sorrows of daily existence, the small deaths that occur when dreams are deferred, when authentic expression is silenced, when love is offered but not received. These griefs, too small to merit conscious attention, yet too significant to disappear entirely, collect in the shadowy regions of the psyche, influencing mood and perception from their hidden locations. With the wisdom of those who understand that healing occurs not through the elimination of pain, but through its integration, they create conditions in which these buried sorrows can safely emerge, can be witnessed and honored rather than analyzed and dismissed. Their presence becomes a sanctuary where tears that have been held for years can finally flow, where the accumulated weight of unprocessed loss can be gently released from its hiding places. But they are equally attuned to the suppressed joys that lie buried beneath layers of social conditioning and emotional caution. In a world that often seems more comfortable with suffering than with genuine celebration, they recognize how frequently the natural expressions of delight, wonder, and spontaneous happiness become casualties of environments that cannot hold or welcome authentic feeling. These buried treasures of joy wait in the emotional underground like seeds in winter soil, needing only the right conditions to burst forth in their original brilliance. The forgotten dreams they unearth are perhaps the most poignant of all buried treasures, those visions of possibility that once burned bright in younger hearts, but were gradually extinguished by the practical necessities of survival, by the well-meaning advice of those who had learned to settle for less, by the accumulated disappointments that teach the psyche to lower its expectations rather than risk further wounding. These dreams, when carefully excavated from their hiding places, often retain their original power to inspire and transform. They carry within them not merely nostalgic longing for what might have been, but living energy that can still fuel authentic transformation when approached with the proper reverence and understanding. Their role as midwives of the soul reveals itself in their capacity to assist in the birth of what has long been gestating in the darkness of unconscious processing. They understand that many emotions require extended periods of underground development before they are ready to emerge into conscious awareness. Like skilled attendants at any birth, they know when to wait, when to encourage, when to simply hold space for the natural process of emergence to unfold. The treasures they help unearth are not always immediately beautiful or obviously valuable. Sometimes they discover rage that has been fermenting in hidden places, resentments that have grown toxic in the absence of light, fears that have expanded in the darkness of non-acknowledgement. Yet they approach even these difficult emotions, as archaeologists approach any significant find, with respect for their historical importance, with understanding of their role in the larger story of a life. Their presence in relationship becomes a form of sacred witnessing that transforms the very nature of human encounter. In their company, ordinary conversation begins to deepen, as people sense the possibility of speaking truths they had not planned to share, of expressing feelings they had thought safely buried. The field of permission they create allows for the emergence of authentic emotional expression that has been waiting, sometimes for decades, for the right conditions to surface. They understand that the emotional underground is not a place of pathology, but a natural repository where the psyche stores experiences too intense or complex for immediate integration. Their archaeological approach honors this wisdom of the unconscious, recognizing that the timing of emotional emergence cannot be forced, but must be allowed to unfold according to the deeper rhythms of psychological development. In their hands, the work of emotional archaeology becomes an art form, a delicate dance between curiosity and restraint, between invitation and patience, between the desire to help and the wisdom to allow. They have learned that the most precious emotional treasures reveal themselves only in atmospheres of complete safety, in relationships characterized by unconditional acceptance, in the presence of those who understand that every feeling, no matter how long buried, carries within it a message necessary for the completion of the soul's journey toward wholeness. Their gift transforms not only those who receive their attention, but themselves as well. For in witnessing the emergence of buried emotions in others, they continue their own archaeological work, discovering within themselves new territories of feeling, new capacities for empathy, new depths of understanding about the magnificent complexity of human emotional experience. Deep within the mythic landscape of the human soul lies an ancient archetype that speaks to the most profound mystery of existence, the wounded healer. Here, in the 10th marking of the transformed soul, we encounter those rare beings who have discovered that their greatest source of medicine lies precisely in the places where they have been most deeply broken. Listen closely, for this is perhaps the most sacred paradox of all, that the very wounds that once threatened to destroy us can become the wellspring from which flows our deepest capacity to heal others. Like Chiron, the centaur of Greek mythology who was wounded by an arrow, he could never fully heal, yet became the greatest teacher of medicine and healing arts. These souls have learned to transform their pain into a gift that serves the world. They did not choose this path. No one volunteers for the initiation of deep wounding. Instead, life chose them, breaking them open in ways that seemed merciless, incomprehensible, final. Perhaps it was the death of a beloved that shattered their understanding of permanence. Perhaps it was betrayal that destroyed their faith in human goodness. Perhaps it was illness that stripped away their illusions of invincibility, or abuse that fractured their sense of safety in the world. But somewhere in the darkness of their descent, something extraordinary occurred. In the depths of their despair, they discovered that pain, when consciously embraced rather than fled from, has the power to crack open the heart in ways that nothing else can. They found that suffering, when met with courage and compassion, becomes a teacher of unparalleled wisdom. Jung understood this alchemical process well, the way that base metals of trauma can be transformed into the gold of wisdom through the conscious work of individuation. These souls became living laboratories of transformation, discovering that the psyche possesses an innate tendency toward healing and wholeness that operates even in the darkest circumstances. Their journey through the underworld of their own suffering taught them things that cannot be learned in any other way. They learned the geography of grief, mapping its valleys and mountains with intimate familiarity. They discovered the strange seasons of trauma, how healing moves not in straight lines but in spirals, sometimes circling back to touch old wounds before moving forward into new territories of understanding. Most importantly, they learned that healing is not the absence of woundedness, but the transformation of wounds into wisdom. Their scars did not disappear. Instead, they became sacred markings, evidence of their journey through fire and their emergence into a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. Now, when others come to them in their own seasons of suffering, these wounded healers offer something that no amount of theoretical knowledge could provide. They offer the medicine of recognition, the profound gift of being truly seen and understood by someone who has walked similar paths through darkness. They do not minimize pain or rush toward premature healing. They do not offer platitudes or false reassurances. Instead, they create sacred space for the full experience of suffering, understanding that pain has its own intelligence, its own purpose, its own timeline. They know that some wounds must be fully felt before they can be transformed, that some grief must be completely honored before it can be released. Their presence becomes a form of witnessing that is itself healing. In their eyes, others see reflected not pity or sympathy, but a deep recognition of the heroic nature of their journey through suffering. They communicate without words that pain is not a sign of weakness, but evidence of the heart's capacity to love deeply enough to be broken open. They have learned to distinguish between the wound and the story about the wound. While the experience of trauma may be unchangeable, the meaning we make from that experience remains fluid, capable of transformation. They help others discover that they are not defined by what happened to them, but by how they choose to integrate and transform their experiences. In their very being, they embody hope, not the shallow hope that pretends suffering doesn't exist, but the profound hope that knows suffering can be transformed into something meaningful, something that serves not only one's own healing, but the healing of others. They become living proof that the human spirit is more resilient than we ever imagined, more capable of transformation than we dared to believe. Their medicine is not technique, but authenticity. They heal not through methods they have learned, but through the depth of their own transformation. They have become what Jung called the wounded physician, one who heals others through the depth of their own healing journey rather than through external knowledge or skills. They understand that true healing happens in relationship, in the sacred space between souls, where one person's journey through darkness can illuminate the path for another. They know that sometimes the most profound healing occurs not through the elimination of symptoms, but through the discovery of meaning within suffering. Their gift to the world is not the elimination of pain, but the demonstration that pain can be transformed into something sacred, something that connects us more deeply to our own humanity and to the humanity of others. They show us that our wounds, rather than being sources of shame, can become our greatest sources of compassion and wisdom. In a world that often seeks to avoid or medicate away all forms of discomfort, they offer a radical alternative, the possibility that our suffering, when consciously embraced, can become the very source of our greatest contribution to the healing of the world. They remind us that the goal is not to eliminate woundedness from the human experience, but to learn how to transform it into medicine. They have discovered what the great spiritual traditions have always known, that the path to wholeness leads not around our wounds, but through them. In their transformed relationship to their own pain, they offer the world a new model of healing, one that honors both the reality of suffering and the possibility of its transformation into something beautiful, meaningful, and ultimately healing for all who encounter it.